everyone. Welcome to the 14 Wins podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all of its related high strangeness. I go by the name of Bones, and with us, as always, is Ram X.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. This is going to be a great episode because we're going to be talking about cryptids. And it's one of my favorite topics, and more specifically, we're going to dive into the topic of the Mothman.
Yeah, you've been waiting to get into this, huh?
Oh,
You've been waiting for this.
Rubbing my hands. But we want to talk. We want to give an update on what's going on in the government.
Yeah, we might as well just briefly talk about it. I think most of our audience is probably familiar. We discussed the Schumer Amendment, what was going on, and how Mike Turner, Mitch McConnell, Mike Johnson, and Mike Rogers were trying to gut it. And I think they succeeded to an extent. They took out the Presidential Review Board so that there wouldn't be sort of a third party to review things and decide whether they should be classified or not. So it kind of gives the DOD and the CIA the ability to keep everything classified.
Right. And it just kind of delays the whole thing altogether, right?
Yeah, it just takes the teeth out of it. I think
right.
What we could expect from, if that's all that's going to pass, I don't think we can expect too much in terms of disclosure. But it's not over. So Schumer is still talking about it. Mike Rounds is still talking about it. It's a bipartisan bill. That's a Democrat and a Republican. And there's a bunch of people. There's Tim Burchett, Anna Polino Luna, Marco Rubio. There's been a number of Congress people pushing for this. So it's not over, and we have these elections coming. So
of course.
I think it's going to show up. And I think if it shows up in the presidential elections, I mean, boy, we're looking at a clown show like we have never seen. So
yeah, can you imagine that at on the debate stage?
Yeah.
Debating that, it would be amazing.
And both of them know stuff about it. So
right.
if it becomes a game of who's going to tell the public the most to curry favor, that ends up being only in favor of disclosure.
Right.
So some of that relies on us. Like, if we make this a real issue, tell people it's a real issue. It's a real issue because it involves oversight. It involves your tax money. It involves government abuses of power. Dave Grush has been giving a bunch of interviews. He was on Rogan. He was on Tucker Carlson. And he's talking about some of these abuses of power, which involve murder.
Oh, yeah. It's true.
Right, yeah. I mean, let's throw the flying saucers out for a little bit and just remember that we need a government that is going to be honest with the American people to the extent that it can be, and not kill people, and not lie to people, and not use our money to deceive us, and not use more of our money to deceive us than you are to even research these objects. Right. We can't have an America that is exceptional with these things hanging out there.
Right. Very true.
So, now that we got that out of the way.
Thank God. Push that aside.
Mothman, man.
Yeah. I mean, where do you begin?
Well, I would like to begin with, we have to start talking about John Keel a little bit here.
Right.
Because this is the most famous book on the Mothman is the Mothman Prophecies. And I don't want to dive too much into that book because it is very special to me. I don't think you can take that book as rote. I don't think it is 100% accurate. I think what it does is it tells you what this phenomenon is and isn't in a way that no other book was able to tell me.
Right.
So Keel recorded a bunch of events in that Mothman case. And what I would first like to tell you, so this all happened in Point Pleasant in the 60s, and it began with UFOs, just like Skinwalker Ranch. I want to start there. Like, it begins with UFOs. UFOs start appearing, and more people end up seeing UFOs than even see the Mothman in Point Pleasant in that time. So it's really a UFO story. So the Mothman shows up with the UFOs. That's important. And it showed up, the most famous sighting and the most sensational, and the one that has the most evidence, is the one that shows up around the TNT sighting, right?
Right. Yeah, so
So,
Point Pleasant was a big manufacturer of TNT during World War II.
and the plant that was shut down was abandoned, and it had stored radioactive material, which I think is important. We've talked about
definitely.
the connection between these things and the UFOs and nukes, and there's also been Mothman sightings around Chernobyl. So there seems to be maybe a link between radioactivity, but we've seen links between radioactivity and UAP, so should be no
Right.
surprise here.
Right.
So these two couples are out in the woods, Roger and Linda, Steve and Mary. Those are their real names. And they're doing the types of things that young couples do in the dark in the woods, outside of an abandoned TNT factory,
Right.
when they see a shape in the dark. And the shape they describe looks something like a man with giant wings, and the shape of the head was indistinct. And the one reference that they gave was that it looked like more what you would think of as an angel. They did not describe it as the Mothman. So that name ends up showing up in the papers the following day. But let me continue with their story, because they see this figure and it starts to move toward them. So they drive away, and they attempt to drive away from this thing, and they're going over 100 miles an hour, and it's keeping up with the car. They get away, or they think they get away, and they see a dead dog, and they're debating whether or not to go to the police. And then as they're looking at the dead dog, the Mothman again comes after their car. And so then they decide, absolutely, we're going to the police station. They go to the police. Right. The police see the damage on the vehicle. They deal with these traumatized kids. And then at least 99 more people see it. Lauren Coleman, who is a very famous Fortean, and when it comes to cryptids, he's the guy, even more so than Keel, I would say. Lauren Coleman is the cryptid researcher that I think has just done the most boots on the ground and library research on the subject. So Lauren Coleman, that's the number he gave, was over 100 people saw the Mothman during that time.
Okay.
But this incident was the most famous because it had material evidence, and these witnesses were rock solid, and they've remained rock solid for 60 years now. They've been in and out of the public, telling their story. They're very credible people. People believe them. And that's just these four. So the Mothman makes a bunch of appearances in Point Pleasant. And John Keel is there, and he witnesses a lot of this stuff. And he at least witnessed UFOs. I don't think he at least witnessed UFOs, but he didn't witness the Mothman. So he did experience a bunch of high strangeness during the time. And like I said, even John Keel noted that his book is embellished. So it shouldn't be taken as rote. But he knew he got it right. He knew he got the phenomenon right. And he wanted to tell people what the phenomenon was and wasn't. And even the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, which came out in the 90s with Richard Gere and Nicole Kidman, is pretty good. And it's way far away from the book. So Keel took liberty with the book, and the movie took even much more liberty with Keel's book. But what Keel said about the movie was that the movie got it right.
Really?
It didn't get the events right. It got the phenomenon right.
Oh, okay.
So this is what people love about John Keel. This is my connection with John Keel. He is my favorite UAP researcher and phenomenon researcher, is that he kind of told them what the phenomenon was and wasn't. He got us thinking about it in a different way. And that's what the Mothman incident did for him. So what that means about the Mothman is, part of this high strangeness. It's part of this paranormal activity. When it's seen, and there was another case that happened in Washington, but in Washington, and this gets into an important point, They call it the bat squatch. They don't call it the Mothman, but they're describing a very similar thing.
Right.
In New Jersey, not far away, they don't call it the Mothman. They call it the Jersey Devil. They're describing a very similar thing. And what they're describing is a winged humanoid. So it looks like a man. It's usually described as a man. It's rarely described as a woman. And it is tall, 7 feet. And I think that number is interesting. We can actually drop this tidbit now. But that number, 7 to 9 feet, is something that we look for in paranormal and cryptid cases, or did. Because at least prior to Peru, people didn't know that number was significant. So, like when a witness would say 7 to 9 feet, I would pay attention.
Right.
And that gets mentioned a bunch. So when I look at Mothman cases, and especially when I'm looking at cases from the past, and I know people didn't know about that number, I pay close attention. So usually around 7 feet, and the wingspan is huge. We go through some of the birds that have been claimed to have been causes for misidentification, right?
Sandhill cranes, right?
That's the sandhill crane, that's the most interesting one. It may have caused some Mothman misidentifications because it's big. I think it's over 4 feet, and the wingspan is big, and the eyes. It has red around the eyes.
Oh, does it really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you usually see them, and I've seen them before, and they're way up there, especially when they're migrating, and they're usually in groups. So I don't really see that being a possibility. But
oh yeah. Well, this first witness, they don't go 100 miles an hour. So this first witness, Roger Scarberry, he was the one driving the car, and it's when a professor, that was when it was during their incident that sandhill crane idea came out. So when a professor said that in a university from far away, told Roger Scarberry that he saw a sandhill crane, he had a few choice words, for
good.
that. Yeah, he should. No. If you saw it from far away and you can't make it out, or if you saw it up in the sky and you're like, that thing looks huge, then yeah, maybe that was a misidentification. I certainly wouldn't call that a definitive sighting. But when it's chasing a car, when it's leaving marks on the car, and when people see it right in front of them, you either believe them or you don't.
Right. And one of the universal characteristics of the Mothman is just glowing red eyes, right?
That's right. So those glowing red eyes are an important feature of the Mothman, I think, because glowing red eyes show up a lot. And that red light, shows up in UAP cases.
Right.
It's caused effects on humans. So that might be something that we're looking at. I mean, this may be some product of a technology. I have some interesting ideas about that technology, but we'll see. That might be a conversation for another time. So that Mothman it's a winged humanoid, and those red eyes are important, and that also comes up in demon cases, right? Those red eyes.
Right.
So this and they called it an angel. You would certainly not be out of your mind to call it a demon, right? I mean, it's 7 feet tall. It's all black. The head is indistinct, and the eyes are red.
Right.
But angels are supposed to be terrifying too. In the Bible, they always show up and say, "Don't be afraid."
Right.
That's the first thing that they say.
There's also the possibility of the folklore of dragons, right? A winged monster.
Right. So the area in New Jersey where the Jersey Devil is seen was once explored by Swedish explorers prior to colonists getting there, and they called the area Drake Kill because they said it was an area where there was a dragon.
Oh, okay. So
they may have identified something along these lines as a dragon, and then 60 years later, it's an angel, and then the following day, it's the Mothman, and the newspapers named it the Mothman because of Batman.
Oh.
It was the late 60s, and Batman was popular.
Right.
So they said, "Oh, let's call it the Mothman." They were looking for clickbait, just like there is
Sure.
today. But when they do that, and I understand why, and not blaming anyone, but when they do that, and the people in New Jersey call it the Jersey Devil, and the people in Washington call it the Bat Squatch, and it gets called many other things. In India, it's called the Garuda. And John Keel wanted to call his book The Year of the Garuda.
Oh, okay.
But that wasn't going to sell books. And like I
Right.
said, this is where Keel, he noted that he had to sell a 1960s UFO pop culture book.
Right.
And so he wasn't able to just do a bunch of notes, like a science researcher might, and have it still get out and be seen. So he did what he did. And that's interesting. I mean, I will do a whole episode on the Mothman prophecies. But the Mothman is a winged humanoid.
Right.
Right? And so this goes right into Jersey Devil research, which is, where does your ideas for the devil come from? Where does the ideas for angels come from? Where does your ideas for demons come from? And we mentioned this in our UFOs and religion episode. We pulled all those descriptions from, the King James version of the Bible of all of the times when people said they saw an angel and what they saw. So I don't think that there is one instance of someone seeing a man with wings. Angels are seen with wings, but they're seen with like 6 wings. And they're seen as with all sorts of different features and different faces. And they're really enigmatic creatures.
Yeah, and they're always depicted with feathers, right? And I think I remember hearing that most of the sightings of the Mothman are not, their wings are not associated with feathered wings, right?
Correct. Yeah, good point. It's more like bat-like wings,
Right.
which is what people associate with demons, but
Right.
those aren't described that way either. Bat-like wings, feathered wings, those all come from pagan ideas, which come from fairies.
Okay, yeah.
And our ideas of angels with golden hair and feathered wings come directly from fairies. Our ideas of grotesque beings with horns and fangs and wings come directly from fairy lore. It's not described like that in the Bible.
Yeah, I remember hearing another parallel. I can't remember who it was. It was either Keel or Valet that talked about the development of dragon lore on 2 different sides of the globe. You have in China, ancient China, and in ancient England. They had,
Yeah. 2 completely different types of lore. And we'll talk about Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and that happens all over the globe.
right.
So winged humanoids happen all over the globe. And you can go back to Egypt, and people like to talk about some of the winged humanoids that they had in their pantheon of gods, Greece and Rome, and the various beings in their pantheons of gods and lesser beings. So winged humanoids stretch way, way back, all the way to our earliest cave art.
Right.
And then they're being seen today in 2023. I like to point
Right.
that out. So there's no beginning or end. This is what I pointed out in my paper, because it was actually on the subject of winged humanoid, which was, there's no beginning or end to this. The Mothman is just one name of a winged humanoid phenomenon that has begun as far back as we know and continues into today. Chicago has had more sightings of the Mothman over the last 20 years than anywhere else, I think.
Yeah. And very
And
recent.
Very recent. They're still happening.
Yeah.
So why is there such frequency in Chicago? My suspicion is O'Hare, because that's really where there was the 2007 O'Hare incident, UAP
Right.
incident, as well as a number of others. So O'Hare is one of the busiest airports in the world, if not the busiest, and it probably attracts a bunch of UAP. It definitely attracts UAP phenomenon. Oh, and then you have Lake Michigan right there as well.
Right. And I was going to say just the sheer, just the size of O'Hare. You got to think about the concentration of the use of radar, advanced radar. So you have all those radio waves all over the place that could also attract that phenomenon.
Good point. And then there's some military bases right there.
Oh yeah, big time.
And then we have something that a lot of researchers connect to these sightings, which is a lot of ancient sites. There are a ton of ancient sites, even mounds around Chicago area.
Oh yeah, the mound cultures. Yep. And that actually, the mound culture, I believe, the focus of the mound culture really is, or the pinnacle of the mound culture is the Cahokia Mounds, which is near St. Louis. But that stretches all the way, down the Ohio River Valley and basically starts around that same area, Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
That's right. So you and I were talking about going and doing a field investigation on one of these in the Chicago area this year. We're trying to pull it off. And we were looking at the area, and just on a hunch, I said, I wonder if there are any mounds around, because that's something people say, is that these things happen around ancient sites. And sure enough, in this tiny little Midwestern town of 15,000 people, there was a set of mounds. And that's right where they saw the Mothman. I don't pretend to understand that connection, but we need to note it when it happens.
Yeah,
just because
sure.
It looks woo-woo and spiritual. I mean, maybe they had a technology. I don't know. But if there's a connection there, we're going to note it. And there sure enough was in this case, and in a number of these Mothman cases, where these things do seem to happen around ancient sites more often.
Right. I know Keel in the Mothman Prophecies, I've actually heard criticism of his book because he talked about UFOs too much, but he was making a definite connection between the Mothman cryptid, and UFOs.
Yeah, I think as we get into cryptids, there's going to be some hurt feelings because people don't. This goes back to the whole we don't like peanut butter in our chocolate thing, where the UFO people don't like it when the Mothman gets involved. And then the Mothman and Bigfoot people don't like it when UFOs get involved.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry, but it's all connected. And Charles Fort mentioned that 100 years ago. It's not like I started out believing that. I came in through UFOs. I didn't think that this, right? I didn't think that this connection existed at all until, I was way deep into the research. And I think this is why they were so coy about Skinwalker Ranch, because it involved a cryptid and it involved this high strangeness and it involved these weirder side of the UAP encounters. And so when Lou Elizondo first came forward and started blowing the whistle on the UAP phenomenon, he didn't talk about Skinwalker Ranch, right? He talked about UAP. Right. And then they kept that kind of quiet. And Dave Grush has shed some light on that. And it seems like what they were doing was studying Skinwalker Ranch to try to curry favor with the real UAP program, who was saying, hey, we don't know what this is, but we've got stuff. Right. And they were like, well, maybe we can find out more about what it is, and you'll show us your stuff. And apparently that didn't work, but it doesn't negate their research. And I would point out it wasn't just that research team. There's been 4 different research teams with 4 different sets of scientists that have gone to that ranch, at least. Just the ones that I'm aware of. There's a ton of research around that ranch that is important to the UAP phenomenon, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And I don't really care whether people do. It's data.
Right.
And that data involves a cryptid. It involves the Dogman. So this data from Point Pleasant involved UAP tons, hundreds, right? Over 100 Mothman sightings and tons of UAP sightings. So there's a one-to-one connection. Chernobyl, there's been lots of UAP activity there. Mothman was seen there. Lots of UAP activity in Chicago. Mothman is seen there. So it's connected. Does that mean that the Mothman is driving UFOs?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And then I think there's a temptation to go in there. Well, then why the Mothman? What's the Mothman? And so I had to do that actually for the paper. I don't like to do that because I would rather keep grinding at the evidence until the connections are inevitable. But I had to theorize for the paper because you can't just leave it open. So when I theorized for the paper about what the function of something like the Mothman, or in my case it was the Jersey Devil, but it's the same thing in the Bat Squatch, I was asked to look into the Jersey Devil. So, and I found that it was just one part of this winged humanoid phenomenon. You're talking about the Mothman, you're talking about the same thing.
Right.
And what's the function of something like that? And the function of it is fear. And then you go, what is the function of fear? And the function of fear is to produce anxiety. So why would someone want to produce anxiety? Why would they want fear? Well, they didn't want them near the TNT. That could be. It didn't, it was up to something at the TNT plant and it didn't want them near that. That could be. And then during the other incidents of when it was seen, maybe it was up to something in those places and just wanted to scare people off. Okay, those things are possible. But these encounters happen to people. And it seems like the encounter is the point. There's a pretty good case in Chicago recently where a mail worker was just parking her vehicle for the night and bumps into the Mothman. And it runs towards her and flies away. The purpose of that seemed to be the encounter. Now, why would something want to continue to show up like that and violate our sense of reality and show you that there's something bigger and more powerful and mysterious in the world? I think people have good or bad feelings about that, right? Maybe it's trying to push us further. That's the positive side of it. Oh, it's trying to tell us that we haven't got it all figured out just yet. Our ideas of materialism, and they are limited. Right. And every generation thinks their ideas of materialism are the right ones. Famously, before the Wright brothers flew, weeks before, the most famous physicists of the time said it was impossible. And the Wright brothers weren't physicists. They just inventors.
Yeah. We're trying to produce a meaningful response to these sightings. When we don't have a real definite answer, we always kind of go back to the multidimensional answer, right? So why do they come and go? Why do they appear? Maybe they're just slipping in and out of other dimensions. The meanings, to find meaning in it is just so hard to do, but what we really do know is that this is something that humans have been living with since the beginning.
Great point.
And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's always been here. And I think it has to cause us to look at our folklore a little bit differently too, because our ancestors weren't entirely superstitious. Right. This gave us the foundations for superstition, and maybe that's the point, is to keep some element of superstition and belief going with us. But they were encountering something.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? It's cryptids and interdimensional. It's everything's so intertwined.
So that's where Keel went, right? He experienced this. He was there. He was present for it all. It involved Men in Black. It involved UAP. It involved the Mothman. And then he became forever associated with the Mothman, even though he didn't want to title his book The Mothman. But that led him, and this experience led him into his book, The Eighth Tower. And we know that one really well.
Yep. That's an amazing piece of work from Keel.
And it's a little dark, right? Keel's conclusions on this phenomenon are a little dark. I don't think that we are there with him just yet, or at least we're hoping that we can disprove him.
Yeah.
But
he
seemed to think it was an interdimensional game, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and he does. I think he mentions one of the correlations. When he wrote the Mothman prophecies, I don't think did he speak of the super spectrum yet. I don't think he did, right? But he did. What really stuck in my mind from the Mothman prophecies that he did talk about phenomenon in light, different shades of light. He said it was real common that you would see like a red. And then and shifting to a blue, like different colors, which was telling him that it was changing within the spectrum.
Right. It was something transferring from a higher dimension to a lower dimension, in our terminology.
Right.
And that red shift to blue shift would be a shift from infrared to ultraviolet light.
Right.
And that's what we would expect to see, right? Keel was saying, I have a hypothesis, and if this was what we would expect to see, we would expect to see red to blue light shifts.
Right.
And you see that. I would say that there are other processes that could cause that. I think we're discovering things in the quantum realm that could cause that now, and that seems to me to be more likely. But Keel was dealing with the science that he had available at the time.
Right.
And that science revolved around electromagnetism.
So, this is also fascinating. Maybe when we delve into the quantum physics, I think it's going to reveal a lot more about the monster story of cryptids. But, our message is that there's more to it. It's not just a monster story, but we want to also talk about Bigfoot. We have to talk about Bigfoot, and we have to talk about the Dogman. So look forward to that, everyone, and our next episode. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's keep doing monsters. I mean, They are kind of fun. I wouldn't want to run into one.
No.
And I feel bad for the people in these encounters, but hey, they're fascinating. I mean, because I think that was what really drew me to them as I got further into the research, was they were so ridiculous. I mean, this is absurd. What are we talking about? We're talking about the Mothman? We're talking about Bigfoot? What are we talking about here? And I think it plays right into the absurdity. So I look forward to talking about Bigfoot, and then we'll do the Dogman after that.
That sounds good to me. Let's talk about some monsters. Thanks for listening, everyone. This is the 14 Wins Podcast.